Big question for me on this, and it's the question that's being raised in the press today, which is, did the people behind the Prevent scheme deliberately send taxpayers' money to people that they know support groups like the Taliban and indeed also wanted Muslim members of our armed forces to refuse orders?
Well, Patrick, I'll say one thing. It needs to be thoroughly investigated. But in truth, I'm not necessarily surprised, because under our state-backed model of multiculturalism, we have seen so-called community leaders empowered under that model in order to try and facilitate social stability in our local communities, when in reality, some of those leaders and figures have been responsible for peddling divisive extremist narratives. So I think the one thing for certain is that if these reports are indeed true, then what we're seeing here is a fundamental failure of Prevent, where groups are being funded to ultimately cultivate social cohesion and solidarity in their local communities, but in reality are peddling extremist narratives which are posing a fundamental threat to social cohesion in our country.
And is that just overtly because there are groups in this country right now who say that they are very well-meaning Islamic groups who actually want to create an Islamic state in this country and are willing to lie to people like Prevent in order to do that?
Well, Patrick, I've come across examples of charitable organisations. They speak the language of harmony and peace. But in reality, when you're looking at some of those charities, what they actually promote and the kind of organisations, other organisations that they support, secretly what they want is various forms of Islamist regulation in the British social sphere. In some cases, they've even expressed support for regimes which are very much hostile towards the British state and more broadly the Western world. So I think that what this really calls for is a fundamental exploration of how that funding is being allocated and the kind of organisations that are receiving those sources of funding.
It says here the Home Office officials are terrified of looking like they are picking on Muslims. What are they afraid of?
Well, I've no idea what they're afraid of, Patrick, because a lot of those organisations aren't representative of British Muslims at all. And this is a point that I made in our conversation yesterday, that if people want to take that line of thinking, what they're doing is actually betraying anti-Islamist British Muslims who are just as concerned as the wider public when it comes to extremism in their own communities.
No, exactly, and this is the thing, and I am concerned that this is totally self-defeating on numerous different fronts. Firstly, the fact that actual taxpayers' money might actually have gone to groups who are just using it to promote things like radical Islam. I mean, that's self-defeating, of course it is, certainly from something called Prevent. But also the fact that if you think that you're doing this to not seem like you're picking on areas of the Muslim community, you're bracketing all the Muslim community in under one particular umbrella, which is hugely unfair. And on top of that as well, I think it's self-defeating because if it looks like a cover-up, it'll probably lead to more far-right issues because people feel as though their security forces aren't protecting them. Surely the best thing to do is just get this all out in the open.
Well, one of the most ridiculous accusations of Prevent is that it alienates British Muslims en masse. But there was a study by Crest Advisory a couple of years ago, which showed that 56% of British Muslims surveyed had not even heard of Prevent, Patrick. So I'm not sure how you can be alienated by a programme that you're not even aware of. And so I think that what we're seeing here, we're seeing the peddling of narratives which are simply not rooted in reality. And what we really need to do is empower anti-Islamist British Muslims who are very concerned about extremism in their local communities, instead of potentially, possibly funding groups which do not have social cohesion at heart.